we are very happy and honored to have here today Dr. Grant Kester. He is an Associate Professor of Art History in the Visual Arts Department at the University of California, San Diego. Kester's publications include Art, Activism, and Oppositionality, Essays from After Image, and conversation pieces, Community and Communication in Modern Art. His forthcoming book, The One and the Many, Agency and Identity in Collaborative Art, presents a theoretical framework for the analysis of collective and collaborative art practice. Kester has worked as curator for projects including Unlimited Partnerships, Collaboration in Contemporary Art in 2000, and Groundworks, Environmental Collaboration in Contemporary Art at Carnegie Mellon University in 2005. His essay has been published in the Blackwell Companion to Contemporary Art since 1945, Blackwell 2005, Theory in Contemporary Art since 1945, Politics and Poetics, Radical Aesthetics for the Classroom, the Encyclopedia of Aesthetics, Oxford University Press, and Ethics, Information and Technology Readings in 1997. He has published also in journals including After Image, Variant, Public Art Review, Exposure, The Nation, The New Art Examiner, Third Text, Social Text, and Art Papers. Welcome, Dr. Grant Kester.
Gotta have all my fluids so I'm hydrated. If I didn't just spill coffee in my white pants. You ever have that where you get the white clothes and then the first, like within a day, something's gonna end up spilled, or I'm gonna be eating a brownie, or it's, is that gonna come through? Let's see. It's a new software. Let's see if that, you're not getting anything, are you? Oh, thank you. Excellent. Okay, let me check my time. And if I'm getting close, Isabel, time-wise, just give me a little wave or whatever. And I just want to thank Isabel and Margaret for the invitation. It's been terrific for me just to see the presentations this morning and this afternoon. Really have just enjoyed it very much and taken a lot of notes and getting lots of ideas. What I'm going to present fairly briefly is a discussion of the work of a group of artists that are operating in a little village called Kondigaon, which is in Bastar, central India. And one of the, Navjot, one of the artists, has got a film that I believe is being screened as part of the exhibit, right, on her work. So if you've seen that, this may be what I'll provide will give you a little framework or a little context for the film as well. That was my hope anyway. Just to give you a little introduction, this is some work from a book project I'm finishing up right now that Isabel mentioned. It's called The One and the Many, and roughly speaking, it looks at contemporary collaborative and collective art practices in two broad areas, and one of them are projects that deal with the impact of neoliberal policies globally, specifically in rural or agrarian contexts, around artistic practices that bump up against the operations of activist groups and NGOs. And one of the kind of basic tenets of the book is that we're living, maybe the last 10 years or so, through a period in which notions of aesthetic autonomy, that is, that art is a kind of defined by its capacity to draw kind of cordon sanitaire around itself in relationship to other areas of cultural practice. That notion is being renegotiated, that autonomy, that there's a kind of permeability opening up between art and other areas of practice. And we've seen it already here. I'm thinking, you know, Raul, you're trained as an architect, and what you're doing now is kind of art practice, and it's kind of, you know, kind of trying to get a fix on what things are or where things are. And I'm thinking of Rick's work. Rick's not an architect, but architects might claim that as a kind of art. So you get a lot of these liminal zones. Same thing with activism, geography. There's just a whole range of cultural and discursive practices, institutional mechanisms against which you find artists bumping up, right? And normally there's a certain anxiety that causes for people that are in those other spheres, and even for artists. There's a kind of a fear of terrains being violated and so on. And what I find really refreshing, I guess, about the work, the work that I like the most is works where there's a comfort with the kind of ambiguity that opens up between art and other areas of practice, and that kind of ambiguity is okay. That's kind of what really modern art has traditionally done, is it's kind of been a series of expanding and kind of collapsing eccentricities around autonomy as art opens itself up to other influences and then closes back down and recoheres. Well, I think we're in a kind of an opening back up phase. And I think that's all actually kind of healthy and good. But that's kind of what guides my practice, is a sensitivity, I think, in particular to these sorts of moments of contact and how to theorize those moments of contact in terms of the knowledge production, and do we still define it as an art practice or not, that sort of thing. So one area is rural projects. I'm looking at Navjot and Dialogue's work and the work of Les Huit Facettes, which is a group in Dakar, Senegal, that operate in a cluster of villages in Hamdalai, which is South Senegal near the Gambian border, and the work of a group called Nika, which is operating in Myanmar, Burma, for the last 8 or 9 years, and a couple other, Ala Plastica, they operate in Rio del Plata Basin in Argentina. Then the other area of work is more urban. And so if the first body of work has to deal with the kind of discourse of what gets called development and globalization, what does it mean to develop something, a site, a culture, a context, a nation, right? The assumptions of a kind of progressive expansion and improvement. Then the second projects are more urban projects, and they deal with the notion of redevelopment or regeneration, what they call it in the European Union, regeneration. And again, what are the kind of moral and aesthetic and kind of ethical issues and also practical issues that get raised within these discursive systems under which a lot of art practice is kind of captured, redevelopment. So, and a lot of that has to do with issues of claiming space and and issues of sovereignty and spatial sovereignty and autonomy. So I'm looking at the Park Fictions project in Hamburg, Germany, if you're familiar with that, or the Prestes Maillet occupations in Sao Paulo, which recently concluded a couple of years ago, but a number of artists were involved in these occupations of buildings in Sao Paulo. Range of different projects. I won't go into detail or get distracted, and then half an hour will pass. I don't even get to Navjot's work. Anyway, that's what the book's about, and this is work particularly that deals with issues at the rural level. Now, all I can really do here is, this is a short period of time, is give you a kind of a descriptive introduction to the work. So that's what I'll try and do. And then if there's questions when we're at the end that you want more detail, I'm happy to provide it. Can you hear me okay so far? Okay. First thing, Bastar is Central India. Central India is, it's fairly isolated and largely has what would be called a scheduled caste or tribal population. So the village where I was doing this research is an Adivasi village. The Adivasi are the basically indigenous people of India that lived before the Aryan invasion, so to speak, and are fairly poor and live still in villages. There's very little electricity or running water in the countryside. So it's in the villages in this area are thousands of years old. They've been basically villages in India for 3,000, 4,000 years. At the same time, it's kind of the land that time forgot. There's also been, in the last decade, intensive development in this region, driven by Indian corporations that are trying to access resources, specifically mineral resources and also water. So these Adivasi villages are under a lot of pressure. There's an Adivasi curse. I hope the government finds minerals under your hut, basically, or field, because if they do, you're screwed, right? Because the government. And then the other pressure, just to quickly give you a sense, is the rise of Hindu fundamentalism in what's called the BJP, which is the right-wing Hindu party, who are rapidly and actively attempting to convert the Adivasi, who are not Hindu, their religion predates Hinduism, to Hinduism, to civilize them on Adivasi. They call them the jungle dwellers instead of the first people. So there's a whole cultural politics of Adivasi culture right now. And in the area where I was is a hotbed of what's called the Naxalite movement. The Naxalites are a Maoist group who control large autonomous zones of Bastar through basically force. And so there's skirmishes in this area between the Indian military and their anti-terrorist forces and the Naxalites, who began, okay, I'm going to stop myself in a second, but they began as organizing miners in an industrial region, and now they've started to spread out to trying to organize agricultural communities. But it puts the young Adivasi in a very awkward position because they're either recruited by the Naxalites in some cases, or alternately recruited by the Indian state to fight the Naxalites. So the rhetoric of Maoism is complicated in central India and this area in particular in terms of what the politics of that sort of notion of resistance is. So that's to give you a little quick sense of the context. Now Navjot is an artist from Mumbai. This is a little scene from the area, just to give you an idea what the landscape looks like. She's a sculptor and a filmmaker, and she came to Bastar about 10 years ago to do some research and ended up more or less staying and forming a collaborative team with 3 other Adivasi, well, 2 of them are Adivasi, 1 is a peasant, former sheep herder, but 3 other artists, Raj Kumar, Shantibai, and Gesu are their names. People just have first names. And they formed a group called Dialogue, and this is their little space in the middle of this village. And the village is called Kopaveda, which is in the township of Kondagawan. Long story, long collaboration, years of work to gain some kind of a foothold and build a network in the village, which is fairly suspicious of all of their presence, but in particular that of Navjot, because she's a metropolitan artist and she's a woman with kind of crazy ideas. And these are very conservative villages. They're still intensely patriarchal. Women are supervised and monitored by men in almost every context that they function. Women do most of the manual work of, for example, water collection. Water collection became an important site of investigation for this group as they formed. So what I'm going to show you in particular are some water pump sites, or what they call nalpar. And I'll try to explain why they're important. This is a little area that they constructed. They do a lot of programs with kids. That's a sign on the mahua tree. That's a mahua tree. They make liquor out of the fruit. It says, Johar to the children, please don't spit. This is a, place that you should respect. That's Raj Kumar, one of the artists, giving a talk. That's Navjot. She's a Sikh, but she invented her own bindi kind of thing. It's complicated. It's conceptual. That's Shanti Bai with some of her artworks. I won't even start. They tell stories about her life. And that's Gesu carving a sculpture. So let me show you, and these are some of the, just quickly show you some of the other collaborators. That's Anita. They work with one of the first things they did to kind of make the village comfortable with their presence was projects with kids where they paint the walls in the village. And these are some of those pictures. And then, that doesn't matter. That's a ritual site. Okay, so let's look at the water pump situation. If you want to survive in Adivasi village, you have to collect water. There is no running water. There are pumps that the Nagar Palika or the municipal government periodically will stick a pipe in the ground into the water table and create a pump. And this is about as much as that they'll do. They'll stick the pipe in and put a spigot on the end of the pipe, and that's where you go to get your water. Now you might have to walk a mile or a half a mile to get the water. If you want to make tea, take a bath, wash something, whatever, that's what you have to do. So you go to get water 10 to 12 times a day. It's mostly young women that do the water collecting in the village. And these are the kind of sites that their government provides. Now, there's no NGOs operating in this area, and there's barely any municipal government. So this is about the extent of it. What the dialogue group decided to do was to focus on the water pump sites as a way to both practically and I suppose at a more maybe aesthetic level intervene in the village. Practically, they wanted to kind of restructure the water pump sites so that they are easier to use ergonomically, just as simple as that. This is a a young girl showing, there's a lot of musculoskeletal problems with the young women because they have to lift these huge vessels onto their heads. So they have significant problems, medical problems. So they just wanted, at the most practical level, this is design level, they wanted to figure out a way to restructure some of the pump sites so that it was easier to move the vessel. And so that was the first step. But then the pump site reconstruction process got increasingly complex. And this is a completed one. So they went from a pipe in the ground, dripping water. And by the way, another thing to bear in mind is that the water that would accumulate would become a breeding ground for malaria. This is a significant issue with malaria in this part of India, and disease, and so on and so forth. So the first thing was to create a series of these kind of sites that were smooth concrete pads that would allow the water to evaporate, and a set of these niches or benches so that they could rest the vessel before they brought it up to their shoulders. So at that level, it's very practical work. It's like, how do you make this more efficient? How do you cut down on the musculoskeletal problems for the young girls and the women that are collecting the water? But it was also a way, I think, to frame that labor of collecting the water and to frame water and its collection and circulation in the village as an activity that was worthy of recognition and acknowledgement, to set it off in some way, to autonomize it, and to claim that space, the space where the water is collected, as a space in which something important happens, in a way to mark that importance. So that women's labor in the village is acknowledged at the kind of formal and structural level. So there's a pragmatic dimension, but there's also a kind of a more cultural dimension. And this is one of the sites being used. As you can see, they're much larger, and that allows a number of women to work at the same time, collecting water, bathing, what have you. And the second feature of the sites that was important was this enclosure that you see around these women. And the enclosures incorporate various designs. They might be vessel shapes, or they might be water pumps, or they might be Adivasi imagery and chevrons and things like that. And what's important, I think, about the enclosures is, again, it has to do with this issue of claiming the space. Because of the enclosures, and the fact that they allowed a number of women to congregate in one space, and the thing to bear in mind is, there really isn't any space in the village. You go to temple, or you're at home. If you're at home, you're supervised by your husband or your mother-in-law. And if you're in the temple, you're supervised by, and the only temples that the government will build will be Hindu temples. You're supervised by the religious patriarchs of the village. So there's literally no place in this village for women to congregate together and to achieve, and to actually communicate and talk and exchange information in a way that's sequestered from men, observing, scrutinizing them in some way, evaluating their behavior. Oh, did you talk to this person? What are you saying? And one of the curious effects of the Nalpar sites, and there's 7 of them now, is that there's been a very subtle but significant reshaping of the kind of psychic geography of the village space. That when you talk to the women, it's really transformed their lives to be able to speak among themselves, to form a sense of solidarity and cohesion as women in the village, drawing on their common experience. So something very kind of practical all of a sudden ramifies off into something that's much more kind of psychological, even spiritual in some ways, in terms of its actual effect. And so I'll show you a few more images of these. But the privacy issue has been really important. Now, this doesn't mean men can't come and use the Nalpar sites, but precisely, all they do is come and drink. But precisely by setting them apart with these barriers, by claiming that space, men are reluctant to go into the. In fact, one of the complaints that the men made when they built the first site, and when they built the first site, there was took a lot of work, overcome a lot of resistance, was that they could no longer watch the women while they were bathing at the pumps. So something as simple as privacy, I know it sounds odd, but that was a big issue. Something as simple as privacy, of women having a space that is sequestered from the gaze of men, was profoundly important for them in the village. So it's a subtle thing. Now, another thing, I can't go into great detail, but the building of the sites involved mobilizing both Adivasi and non-Adivasi and Hindu and non-Hindu craftspeople. This is also really important because there's a lot of tensions between Hindu and non-Hindu because of the BJP and some other right-wing groups. And so they made a concerted effort to bring representatives from both those groups, as well as people from the city. Raipur is the closest city, but at least from Kandigaon, in, so that they had a kind of exchange going on between a little bit between urban and rural, across Hindu and non-Hindu, Adivasi, non-Adivasi. And this is one of the building workshops for the pump sites. Another little detail, they would have drainage coming out so that the animals could use, or people could use the excess water for watering their gardens or their animals. And here's another one of them. It's designed as a huge water faucet, the enclosure. You can actually see it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is you kind of walk around it, and then there's somebody inside, but you can't see her from the road. So that privacy is very important. She's doing some washing. Here's another one that's not as enclosed. But most of them are fairly enclosed. This is one of the few that's more open, got a more open plan. These are just some kids playing. And that's the drainage runoff from the pump site there. All right, so and now the second set of projects I'm going to show you, those are the pumps, the Nalpars. These are called Pilagudi. Now, one of the things that Rajkumar and Shantibai and Gesu and Navjot noticed in terms of just the way in which the kind of geography of the village, where women were able to congregate and where women were able to achieve some intimacy or privacy and so on. They also noticed that as much as it was difficult for women, it was also difficult for children. There aren't really spaces for children in the village as well, outside of school and the temples. There used to be a tradition called the Gotul, and the Gotul was a Adivasi tradition in which young children, I guess from maybe the ages of about 5 or 6 up to teens, would live together in these dormitories away from their parents, and they would educate each other, teach each other songs, musical instruments and drumming. They would pass along stories, and they basically lived collectively as young people up until the age at which they would be married. And they would form relationships. In fact, this was encouraged. They were encouraged to form relationships, and not just single relationships, but to kind of try each other out, I guess is the way to describe it. And that was what one did. And then one became married and went off, and you had a life with that person. The Hindu government did not like the Gotul system because it considered it licentious to have young people having sex together outside of adult supervision, and the children were not responsible enough. Now, this is obviously a tradition that's been going on for thousands of years, but the Hindu government decided that was not acceptable behavior, so they've tried to eliminate the Gotul. So as a result, there's very few spaces, again, where the children can form their own sense of self, a collective identity, have conversations, exchanges, and so on. So the second body of work I'll just show you fairly quickly are these Pilagudi. Pilagudi means a children's temple. And it takes the form of the temple, which are, you see a lot of temples in this part of, in India in general, but in particular in this part of India. And it takes that form and kind of inverts it in a way and makes it a temple for children. This is Rajkumar's temple in a village that's not too far from Kopaveda. And it's based on a very famous Matar mother goddess temple, which is about 150 kilometers away. I think I got pictures of the mother goddess temple. Where is it? Here it is. Now this is the Matar temple on which Rajkumar based his temple. And when you look up in the eaves of, this is not a Hindu, it's an Adivasi temple. Adivasi has a lot of mother goddess figures opening their vaginas to release the earth and stuff like that. So here's the goddess figures, and so when you look up, you see all the goddess figures kind of looking down, kind of like when you go into church, right? You know, it's all about the architecture imposing a certain notion of subordination to a higher power, right? Basically, so you look up, and something's looking down on you. What is that something? It's a divine form. So Rajkumar took that notion of the temple, and he replaced the deities with mirrors, so that when the children are in the space and they do all kinds of workshops and the kids meet there and so on, and they look up, they don't see the deities looking down, they actually see themselves reflected back. So symbolically, it's meant to invert that notion of agency or disempowerment that one has in the temple and replace it with this notion of the children as being actors, as having a kind of agency within the village. And I think a lot of this is about notions of agency and what's possible in the village in this particular context. So, and there are a lot of these, I can't go into great detail, but there are a lot of these interesting architectural inversions that take place in a lot of Dialogue's works. I'll show you a few pictures of this. And then there's one other kind of interesting Pilagudi. This is one that was built more recently, and this is built, now Rajkumar designed the Pilagudi that I showed you. This one was actually designed more or less in collaboration, basically designed by the children in the village. And this is a drawing from a little boy named Somnath of what they would like in their own children's temple. And what they asked for was a building that would allow them to, that a building is kind of not a building, but also a kind of playground at the same time. And so what he designed was this structure with these walkways that go up to the pitched roof, right? And he also wanted it turned away from the rest of the buildings in this little area where Dialogue has some buildings, the members have some buildings, so that the adults couldn't be kind of watching them, watching what they're doing. A lot of this work has to do with, again, observation and surveillance. And so that was his proposal. And this is the actual structure that they built. And here are the kids making use of it, going up on the roof. And they do this, when I was there, the kids will come into this area every day, and there are dozens of them because there's really no place else for them to go in the village to play. So they'll come and play on the roof. They'll go into little classrooms, and they have classes and meetings, and they can do art projects and so on. I'll just show you a few images of it in use. They are kind of hanging out. And this is the other side of it that you can't see. It's kind of turned away so that it's more private. All right, so those are Navjot's projects. Now, that's probably about half an hour, right? Well, I can probably end there. I'm afraid if I start another one, it's going to take me another 10 or 15 minutes. I don't want to go over. So that's basically the work I was looking at, and I'll leave it at that. And then if you have follow-up questions, just we can do it during the Q&A. Thanks.